Alright guys, welcome back to the video. So we're continuing work on the entryway table here. In the last video, we got our middle dividers here mounted in, as well as our door slides and our floating shelves. So that was a decent amount of progress, but now we want to start working on the exterior and getting this whole thing finished off. So real quick before we get into the video here, I just want to let you guys know that I started a Patreon page recently. So if you'd like to show your support for the channel, there will be a link in the card above as well as the description down below. I've got 3 different tier levels, each with their own set of perks and that you can enjoy. If you join the top tier, you get to be a part of a monthly design session that happens on the first Saturday of each month, as well as free access to all of my digital plans and SketchUp files for all past and present projects. So if you guys are interested, I would really appreciate if you're willing to go check that out. But anyway, let's get right back into the video. And so with the drawer boxes, there's a pretty good lesson to be learned here. At the beginning of the project, I started by breaking down all of my stock and figuring out all the pieces I wanted compared to my actual cut list. Now, on a project where I'm building it for someone else, you know, it's a design that I'm kind of locked into, that works just fine. But in the case of a project like this, where I'm just building it for myself, I'm building it to try and be creative, I'm trying to make something that is interesting, I need to know better than to do that in the future, because as you guys have seen through this project, things just constantly keep changing. You know, we do one thing, changes up another thing, changes up another thing. You know, there's been a domino effect all the way through this project. And so now I have a problem of I've got all these different pieces that I cut up specifically for my drawer boxes that are just completely too short. So at the beginning of the project, if you want to do a big milling phase where you're just breaking down all your pieces, getting them roughed out, I would suggest avoiding things like your drawer boxes, drawer fronts, door pieces, all that kind of stuff. Those areas that may end up changing size as the project develops, those are pieces that you're gonna want to break down or, you know, figure out later on in the project once you have the actual main structure more so figured out. So before we do our last step with these pieces, which is cut them down to their final width, we need to know what that width needs to be. So for these drawer boxes, I'm going to be using box joints for 2 reasons. One, I want to get a little bit creative. I want to do something different besides dovetails because I use dovetails on basically every drawer box I've ever made. I want to try something different. I want to see what it looks like. Reason number 2, I think it'll actually look a little bit better and it'll go a little bit better with the overall piece. We've got a lot of those geometrical, you know, stripes in that with all of our slat structure in the sides and the drawer and the insides, all that kind of stuff. So I think having a joint that has a little bit more of a square geometric pattern to it is going to match a little bit better overall. Now, it's a very nuanced thing, but it's something that is worth considering. But mainly, I just want to try using a different type of joint for my drawers. And so unlike dovetails, box joints are very set in their ways. You can't adjust a box joint to kind of evenly space out on your piece of wood. You need to make sure that you size your piece of wood so that your box joints lay out in a way that you want them to. So I'm going to be using my Lee D4R Pro with the box joint attachment on it. And the best thing about using any of the Lee products is they come with a booklet that tells you everything you need to know about using the product, including with the box joint, exactly all the sizes that I need to know. So on the jig, it comes standard with the ability to cut a 1/2 inch box joint. But you can also use that same setup to then cut a 1/4 inch box joint, which is what we're going to be doing here with just a 1/4 inch upcut spiral bit. And so with our chart here, all we need to do is find our 1/2 inch column because that's the section of the jig that we're going to be using. And then all we do is just plus or minus a 1/4 inch from any of these measurements. And so with this chart, I can decide whether or not I want symmetrical box joints, which means that you either end with a pin on the ends or don't have a pin on the ends, or we can do asymmetrical. So you'll either have a notch or a pin at the end. So we're going to be going asymmetrical just because it's a little bit easier to line up. It's closest to the size that I wanted these drawers to be. So we've got our two drawer boxes, and real quickly before we do our glue up here, there's two things I want to mention. You'll notice that on the drawer boxes, I cut off the bottom of the backside there so that we can actually slide in a replaceable bottom panel. Now, if you're making drawers of basically any scale, you want to make sure that the bottom panel is replaceable because that's the most likely thing to get broken. And so it's super easy to do this. All you need to do is just using your standard table saw blade. You want to make sure you're using a standard blade, not a dado stack. You're going to use that to cut your groove. So you're just going to sneak up on the cut. In this case, for these drawer bottoms, I'm going to be using 1/4 inch plywood. So I just snuck up on the width of my groove in the bottom here until that piece of plywood fits in there nicely. Then all I did is just raise the blade up to a height where it's actually going to cut through the wood, and then I sliced off the bottom of the back piece. The other thing that's important to mention is the tightness of the joinery. Now, if you watch any videos on YouTube, or especially it's getting really bad on Instagram, you'll see people that they'll cut joinery and then they'll slide it together and it'll be completely gap-free, and they'll shake it around a little bit to show that the joint actually holds itself together without any glue or anything. And for some joinery, that's okay. For dovetails, they can be pretty tight when you're putting them together. But in the case of a box joint, you do not ever want your box joint to hold itself together under its own pressure. You can see here that I can very easily pull these apart. They are a slightly tight joint. There's no slop to them, so they're moving around, but I can very easily just pull them apart like that. And this is vitally important, especially with something like a box joint, because there is so much glue surface in there. And what happens when you apply anything but like a polyurethane glue to the wood is the wood expands. If you have a really tight joint, one that you have to hammer together in order to get the pieces to line up, that's not going to be good, because when you do your glue up, you're going to have to hammer each corner, and that hammering not only risks breaking the joint because it's going to be even tighter when you actually apply that water-based glue to it, it's also going to take away valuable time during your glue up. So that's just something to keep in mind, especially if you're having trouble with your glue ups. If you're finding that your joints are just too tight when you go to do the glue up, try just in general making them a little bit looser during the kind of the construction phase, and that'll make your glue ups easier down the road. So with our drawer boxes out of the clamps now, we can start flushing them up and getting them to actually fit between our drawer slides. So to start, all we need to do is with our front and back faces, we just need to flush our joinery and make sure it's sitting nice and flat all the way across. Especially on the front side, because we're going to be screwing a false drawer front to this drawer box, we need to make sure that it's nice and flat all the way across. Then once we have our front and back side flushed up, then we can start working on our sides. And this is where the actual adjustment comes in, because we know that over the length of this whole drawer here, we have about an extra 1/16 of an inch of material. So that means off both sides, not only do I have to flush up the joinery, but I also have to remove about a 32nd of an inch of material. The important thing here though is that you want to make sure you're watching your grain direction, especially in a wood like ash, which is very prone to tear out. So I can very easily tell on this piece that my grain is going up in that direction there. So I'm always going to be hand planing in that direction. So I'll start by flushing up the joinery, then I'll make sure to hand plane it nice and smooth. And I'm going to sharpen my hand plane iron right before I do this because I want it to be as sharp as possible so I can avoid tear out, hopefully. Things were going great. I was hand planing the drawers. We were getting minimal tear out with that nice freshly sharpened 40-degree blade. It's even on this ash, which is pretty impressive. Then on what was going to be my last pass, right, just cleaning up the backside here, I had a few pencil marks now that I just wanted to get rid of. I thought it'd be nice and quick and easy. I slipped with the plane and drove it right into the bottom corner here. Now you can see that we have created a pretty big issue. By hitting this back corner here, there was enough force to then split out basically the whole bottom edge of the drawer here. Now, if I was making this for a customer, I would be remaking this drawer because this is not acceptable at all. But because I'm just making this for myself, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sneak a whole bunch of tight bond in there and get it as glued up as I can possibly get it, and then we're just going to go from there. So we got the drawer all fixed up. It looks fine by my standards, but again, if I was making this for a paying customer, I would remake the drawer, because the one thing you don't want to do anytime you're handing a project off to a customer is have any kind of obvious cracks, checks, anything like that in it. Because even if you stabilize it, you know that crack is not going to spread, anything like that, your customer is still going to be a little bit uneasy about it. Unless you make sure you take the time to explain to them that the crack has been fully stabilized, it's not going to be an issue. But something like this, I don't think any customer I've ever had would trust a drawer that has that big of a crack in it. Now, the funny thing is that because I filled this with the Type-On 3, that's soaked into all the fibers around that area, that section of the drawer is probably stronger than it was before I cracked it and glued it up. But the problem is that it looks damaged, and therefore it is a damaged good. So I wouldn't want to actually sell it. But in this case, because I'm making this project for myself, I really don't care about that, and I know that it's going to be just as strong, and I don't have to worry about the drawer cracking any further now that I've gone in and done that solid repair to it. So we now have our drawer fronts mostly fitted up. The last thing we have to do in order to get them fully fitted up is to remove some material with the hand plane. Because even though for the majority of this project I've worked with machinery, I've used jigs and all that to align everything, things are not always going to be perfect. The biggest issue is that there is human error involved in this. The machinery side of things is pretty much perfect. The human error side includes things like gluing up the drawer boxes. There's no guarantee that I got them perfectly square. I did my best, but there's no guarantee that they're perfectly square. Same thing when I was installing the drawer slides. There's a lot of human error involved in that. There's a good chance that I didn't get everything perfectly lined up, and they're not perfectly set back from each other. So now with our false drawer fronts, what we need to do is go through and remove a little bit of material. So I intentionally left our drawer fronts a little bit thicker. So the goal with our drawer fronts is we want them to line up perfectly with these two edges here. And so on our drawer fronts right now, on the left-hand side here, we have about a 1/16 of an inch proud past that wall there. And then on this side, we have just under 1/8 of an inch, I would say. So just easily by feeling these two sides, I can tell that there is going to be a slight taper to these, which is something you can't do if you're only going to work with machinery. There's no machine that would let me accurately taper that. You know, there's ways I could manipulate the jointer, the planer, any of that kind of stuff. But the hand plane is going to let me make those micro adjustments exactly as I need to make them to fit these things nice and slowly. It's going to be way more accurate than using any kind of machine for this process because all I'm doing is just removing material and checking my drawer fronts against the actual assembly here until they fit perfectly the way that I want them to.